All right, welcome back to Bloody Besties with your hosts, Ruby Wild
and Melissa May.
Melissa May has me cracking the F up right before we get started.
Some sort of thing.
All right, what topic did I give you?
We have double jeopardy today.
Mm-hmm.
The double jeopardy clause of the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution says, nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb. They had a way of saying things back in the day, didn't they?
Legalese is not my forte, and trying to read trial transcripts and everything like that, I bang my head against a wall, but I do my best just so that way I could try and dumb it down for me to understand.
Yeah, we don't talk like that anymore, which sometimes I appreciate, like when you're insulting someone, like in the old timey ways.
Oh my gosh.
It's amazing.
Oh, like the whole Shakespearean, I bite my thumb at you. I love that.
What's the biblical one? They're like, you should curse people biblically. Like, I wish you fields of no growth and blah, blah, blah.
Fallow fields.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
O.J. Simpson may be the most famous name associated with double jeopardy. In 1995, Simpson was acquitted in the killing of his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her friend, Ron Goldman. Then, 11 years later, it came to light that Simpson was writing a book, tentatively titled If I Did It, and reportedly including graphic and detailed scenes that, quote, hypothetically, unquote, described how the killings might have occurred. Outrage ensued, and the book was dropped. But the situation left many scratching their heads, wondering why Simpson would not be retried for the murders if he confessed, or new details about the crime came to light. Because he had a jury trial, the defendant had double jeopardy protections as soon as the jury was sworn in. Legal problems he incurred in the coming years following the civil trial were completely unrelated to the slaying of his ex-wife and Goldman. That being said, let's start our episode with a quote Ruby gave me to read.
This is all she gets of what this episode's about. It's kind of fun.
Double jeopardy. Here's the quote. I, Donald Hume, do hereby confess to the Sunday pictorial, is that right?
Okay.
That on the night of October 4th, 1949, I murdered Stanley Setti in my flat in Frenchy Road, London. I stabbed him to death while we were fighting. What the fuck, Ruby?
Now, why would this man need to make this statement? This whole story started with a torso that was wrapped in a carpet, and that was found on the Essex coast of Dengie mudflats by a farmer who had been out shooting ducks, Sidney Tiffin, on October 21st, 1949. I want to know, and I made Melissa May look this up, what constitutes a torso as opposed to just a straight dismemberment like what we were discussing in last week's episode?
Yeah. The main part of the body that contains the shoulders, chest, abdomen, pelvis, buttocks, and back. Most of the body's organs and backbone are found in the torso, or it's called a trunk.
Okay, so if there's only one arm left, no head, no other arm, and no legs, is that still a torso? Just one arm.
If you just find an arm, or the arm's attached
like the arm's attached to everything else. There's no other arm, no legs, no head. Is that still a torso?
I don't know.
Right? Me neither. Or like if there's just a head with a trunk, no arms, no legs. Is that a torso?
Yeah, I looked everywhere, and I even looked at what it's called if it's found that way, and I couldn't find anything.
Kind of rude. That's why I had you look it up, because I was like, I want to know, but apparently nobody knows.
No.
Sidney Tiffin went immediately to the constable to report what he saw, and this is what started this entire series of events. This was a male's torso, dressed in a cream-colored silk shirt with blue shorts. He still had arms and hands intact, tied behind his back. That's why I was wondering if it's a torso. But everywhere it's reported it's a torso, but there's still arms.
I kind of think no.
Right?
I would say a body missing, it's blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, but everywhere reported it was a torso. And I'm like, I don't feel like it is. And this is why.
We need help. Who knows this answer?
Help us. His legs and head were removed, however, which would lead to the assumption that the fingerprints had been readily available for identification. You would be partially wrong. And this is actually, Melissa May is the one who gave me the topic for this episode, but she didn't realize that she did. And that's because degloving was necessary to figure out these fingerprints.
I love degloving.
I know. You talked about it, and I was like, I'm going to find a case with degloving. So here we go.
You want to know what degloving is?
I mean, I'm sure somebody does. I know what it is. I've seen it.
A degloving injury is a traumatic injury that results in the top layers of the skin and tissue being torn away from the underlying muscle, connective tissue, or bone.
Mm-hmm.
That is so gross.
Mm-hmm.
They most commonly affect the legs and are frequently associated with underlying fractures. Because they typically involve severe blood loss and tissue death, they're often life-threatening.
Mm-hmm.
There's 2 types of degloving injuries. Are you aware of this? You probably are.
I know of 2 ways that degloving can occur. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. When the skin and tissue are ripped away and the muscle and bones are underneath or exposed,
Mm-hmm.
this is characterized as an open degloving injury. In some cases, the skin may be partially attached and hanging as a flap near the wound. I don't like flaps.
Anything that's described as a flap is rough. But yeah.
The second one is a closed degloving injury. It's a bit more complicated. The top layer of skin remains intact, even though it's been separated from the tissue underneath it.
Mm-hmm.
Closed degloving injuries often occur at the hip bone, but can also affect the torso, buttocks, lower spine, shoulder blades, and knees.
Yeah. A lot of that is also like, it can be confused with slippage.
That's what I was thinking the whole time.
Yeah.
Is you telling me your slippage. And I was like, ugh.
Yeah. The reason, okay, I don't know why I do this. I did have a case where I don't want to discuss too much of the circumstances, but a human hand glove had been left behind at a crime scene and the rest of the body went elsewhere. The coroner's office had somebody in that office have to put the human glove on in order to roll the fingerprints.
Over their gloves.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
And so you have to find somebody with approximately the same hand size. And to be able to do this,
I would lose my cookies.
I mean, I don't know if people volunteer for it or what, but like I said, it's not like you can have somebody with a massive hand try and put on a small little female glove. So when you find somebody, if the glove fits,
I know,
to go
OJ.
back to OJ. So in this case, since the torso was too decomposed for traditional printing, but the fact that it was waterlogged, it made degloving possible. So they were able to remove the skin from the fingers, and Superintendent Frederick Sherrill of the Scotland Yard, who was super famous fingerprint examiner of the day, he was responsible for the implementation of the Henry classification system based on Sir Henry's development of this 10-finger cataloging system. Anyway, he's super important when it comes to the forensic fingerprinting field. He put his own fingers inside the glove to be able to roll the prints, and they were able to do it and confirm that it was a man who had served 20 years prior for a fraud charge. This man had been stabbed in the chest 5 times, and that's what caused his death prior to his dismemberment and disposal. This man was Stanley Sethi. He was born Suleiman Sethi in 1903 in Baghdad, Iraq. He was one of 4 kids in a Semitic Jewish family. He immigrated to England when he was 4, but 20 years later is when that fraud charge came about, leading to him serving 18 months in prison for pleading guilty to 23 offenses under the Debtors and Bankruptcy Acts. Because of this, he was not allowed to have a bank account, which led him to holding large sums of cash as a facet of his business. Having such large sums of money, he was what's considered a curbside baker with a K, and it earned him the nickname of Stan the Spiv. And Spiv is a slang term for a crook at the time. And it's basically because he had all this cash on a system, so you could walk up and basically do your banking with a human rather than an actual bank. And especially because we're considering the timing, people weren't trusting banks a whole lot. Now, we're also during World War II when gas was heavily rationed and people were given coupons. I like calling them coupons. I can't help it. He was able to counterfeit these coupons and sell them for extraordinary prices. I'm just going to give you a little bloop of history for a second. And that's during World War II, the German U-boats loved to target oil tankers because they were trying to remove the supply of gas to the Allies. So they couldn't fly, they couldn't drive, no factories could make guns, ammo, clothing, etc. This led to a shortage of gas on the east coast of the United States. So on April 9th, 1942, gas deliveries were decreased to the 17 eastern states and rationing began. And then on May 15th, 1942, people were registering for gas ration cards. And by November 26th, 1942, the government declared a nationwide gas ration. This is where you got this little sticker or something that went in your window of your car that said what you were allowed to have,
Yeah.
right?
Yep, that's correct. And each sticker, it would be A, which most motorists got. You got 3 gallons a week, but then it was reduced to 2 gallons March 22nd, 1944. If you were issued a B, those were for war workers who shared rides with 3 or more passengers, kind of carpooling. You got 8 gallons per week. If you got a C, you were considered essential occupation used, such as physicians, clergy.
Church peoples. So church peoples were as important as surgeons?
Yeah.
Huh.
Like a priest, maybe?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Don't know
You
where
had
they're
to go-
driving. You have your fucking. Wait, we are an explicit podcast. I'm allowed to say this. You have your fucking church. Where else do you need to go?
You have to go to the hospital to read your last rites, maybe? You have to.
Okay.
Isn't that what they do?
Yes.
See?
Okay. Whatever.
Mail carriers also got C's in their windows. And then the other ones didn't really say how many gallons per week, but if you got a D as in David, you were a motorcycle. E's were for emergency vehicles, duh. R's are non-highway use, such as farm vehicles, unlimited gas.
Yeah, I think so. They needed the farmers to keep working.
Yeah, got to provide food. T for truckers.
Obvious. And if you listen to our truckers episode,
you need a lot of gas.
Yeah. And if you haven't,
Diesel.
the very last one, you were talking about how many gallons they go through at a time. If you haven't listened, there are 4 episodes all about killer truckers that if you have missed because you're going backwards,
catch up.
You've got in your future.
And lastly was a controversial sticker because the VIP people got it, and that was an X.
So if you're rich,
maybe like mayors and politicians.
Right. And what these stickers were is basically each month or each week. So say you were able to get 3 gallons, you would get 3 coupons for a gallon. Each one was a gallon. And then you would hand them over and you would get your 3 gallons. Well, Stanley was counterfeiting. So you could get 5, 6, 7 and not need to prove that you had any others because you had your rationing. And it's kind of.
I'd make a bunch of X's.
Yes. Wouldn't that be nice? I think that might be a red flag, though.
Like I would counterfeit a bunch of $10 bills and not 100s and
right. Such. And as you can tell by the stickers, things were getting just so much more stringent. So there was a ban on pleasure driving. And then on top of that, vehicle production stopped January 1st, 1942. So you couldn't buy a new car after February 22nd, 1942. Because they were like, why are we producing cars that you're not allowed to drive because we're out of money?
Check.
Right? And so the commercial vehicle production stopped. The factories were now converted to making Jeeps, tanks, bombers for the military. Cars were allowed to be made again by 1945. So there's a nice little gap where people could do side hustles to make money and capitalize on all these factors that have been put into place. And Stanley saw it. He was last. Okay, so what I mean, I'll get into it in a second. He was last seen October 4th, 1949, when he sold a Woolsey 12 saloon vehicle for 1,000 to 1,500 pounds in 5 pounds notes. A Woolsey is a British car company. We don't have it anymore. We've never seen it. It was a really decent car company back in the day. And now because you couldn't have any new cars, car resales at this time from World War II, the resale price is higher than the manufacturer prices. because you couldn't get a new car, which means you had to buy cars that already existed. It's supply and demand. They knew that they could have these cars and just up the price and sell them again. The thing is if you go to a legitimate car sales rep, you had to sign an agreement saying that you would not resell your vehicle for at least a year because they knew that supply and demand was happening and people didn't want, like the flipping house market. They didn't want a flipping car market. This was why a used car dealer was so lucrative. Now, the last sighting of him was 6:40 p.m. buying a newspaper. Before I even get into that, that's how Stanley was making so much money. Is he was selling used cars,
gas stickers,
and gas stickers, and the used cars were not exactly legal to be resold at the time. We'll put it that way. The gas stickers were definitely not allowed to be sold at the time. And that is why when they were looking into his history, they looked into when he was last seen. Like I said, that was 6:40 p.m. buying a newspaper. They say that his prized yellow Citroen was last seen parked outside his garage that evening and through the next morning. His brother, however, knew that Stanley would have never left his car outside. One, you're dealing with a vehicle shortage and people are going to be stealing your car. And two, anybody who has a prized vehicle knows that that prized vehicle goes in the garage, especially in a well-populated area. It doesn't just get left on the street. My car, we are making room for it in my garage, but we're getting there. But I live in a rural area, so I don't have to worry about anybody coming down here to get it, because if you do, we will know.
You just have hail. I worry about the hail on your cars.
Yeah. Oh, have you seen like the thing where you can make the dollar store, Dollar Tree, where you get the pool noodles and you make kind of a blanket for your car?
No.
Oh my gosh. I'm so doing that. I don't know why.
Like you side by side?
Mhm.
Like no gap?
Yeah. And it's supposed to be really good. And I didn't have to do it this year, knock on wood, because we didn't get hail. So that was pretty sweet. That's my plan. But
Well, they're $1 right now. I just saw them yesterday.
Same.
For the skinnier ones.
Before next winter, our vehicle is going to be in the garage because we are 80% done with cleaning that thing out.
Well, you still have spring coming.
Yes. And we have lived in this house not even 2 years now, so you can't judge. Our garage is still getting settled. Aside from any of that personal life. So his brother saw that the vehicle was parked outside overnight, and that's when he got super concerned. So at the time of Stanley's disappearance, he was engaged to Connie Palfreyman. She knew of no reason that he would have gone anywhere without letting her know. Knowing he had this money on hand at the time of his disappearance gave police a lead because they were able to track down those 5-pound notes. This was because the clerk distributing the funds would have written the serial numbers down that she had distributed, along with the name of the person who withdrew the money. So because he was a total cash company, what he could do is he would get, say, a check, and then he would go and cash the check immediately because he didn't have a bank account. Well, the clerk would, because it's a copious amount of money, 1,000 to 1,500 pounds, especially at the day of World War II, she would be like, okay, this is a lot of money, so I'm going to say I'm giving you the money, the 5-pound notes with serial numbers from M4103901, I'm sorry, 039801 to 040,000. Those are all the monies that he had. Whatever, I'm saying it how I want. Monies. Because she had written all these down and they knew that Stanley said he was the one that had these notes, they knew that whoever killed him and stole the money from him would have these notes, and therefore they put out an APB. If you have anybody that cashes anything with a 5-pound note with the serial number, let us know, because they knew that that was his killer. And this all panned out. Well, let's get into why the fact that they actually have serial numbers on the money anyway, because I figure every nation has serial numbers on money, right?
Yes, every banknote or important transferable documents have serial numbers to prevent counterfeiting and trading stolen ones, which is exactly what they did.
That would make exact sense. Yes.
They do seem like random digits, but they do have a role, not just for identification, but also collectors who hunt for rare and desirable sequences.
Okay, I do have a funny story about that. I don't know how it happened, and I don't know why my little girl got left out. My My oldest sister and her husband, back in the day, they were also non-breeders, and they had their dogs. And so my dad would find $1 bills with serial numbers that started with the letter of their dog's name
Oh.
and then give it to them.
Cute.
Right?
Yeah. No R?
Oh, rude. But it's fine. It's fine. And, then it just became a cute little tradition between them. And it is what it is. But yes, you can use the serial numbers to do some fun stuff in your personal life. So say you've got a niece, nephew, daughter, son. If you start putting that money away with the serial number that starts with their letter, who knows how much money they're going to have by the time they turn 18. It would be kind of fun.
And that first letter of the serial number corresponds with the year that it was printed. And if it has a star, which I personally haven't paid attention, but if it has a star, then that means that it was a replacement during the production process.
I don't think I've ever seen star. Is that just in U.S. currency?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen a star.
I don't even look at that.
I feel like that would be really rare and worth a lot of money.
Probably. Duplicate.
You know what? I'm sure my husband would have something to say about it because he also collects mint coins. We have so many. It's fine. I'm fine. Everything's fine. So now that we know why there is these serial numbers and the serial numbers that have happened, it all panned out because October 26th, one of the 5-pound notes was found at Romford Greyhound Station. 5 more were found the following day at a dog track in Southend. And then also a taxi driver went to the police telling him he had paid, or he had a client that paid with one of the 5-pound notes that had been stolen. He said that he took his passenger from the Southend Airport to Finchley Road. Why do we have,
that's in my quote. That's in my quote, right?
It is. Now you may remember Finchley Road from the quote that Melissa May read at the top of the episode. So we're starting to see how this is all coming full circle. And Melissa May still has no clue what's coming out. I know. So police figured out which plane left from that time and discovered that a man named Donald Hume had hired a plane, and he was an associate of Stanley's. On October 28th, the net was closed in on this man, and he was arrested in his home at 620B Finchley Street, and that home was searched. Just about everything else that we know from this point on comes from Donald himself, so we're going to take everything with a grain of salt, but this is, to the best of our knowledge, how everything went down. Donald was born 1919 as Brian Donald Hume and was the illegitimate son of the headmistress of a school, and so she gave her son to a local orphanage to be raised. According to him, the orphanage was misrun, allowing 8 children per bed, little food, they were locked in cellars. Green Gypsy was allegedly a thing where a member of the staff would dress up and scare the children on a regular basis.
8 children per bed?
According to Donald.
Oh, my goodness.
According to Donald.
And would they scare him to make him go back into bed? I
don't know, but this kind of reminds me of, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, where they've got the 4 grown adults in the bed in the living room.
Yeah, in the beginning, the opening scene, they all look sickly and stuff.
Yeah, which, by the way, okay, sorry, fuck Grandpa. That boy is pretending to be completely bedridden until he gets a chance to go to Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, and then he's up and dancing around. Are you kidding me? You're just making people wait on you hand and foot because you can, but the second that you want to actually do something, you have no problem getting out of bed to do it.
Because he can get away with it.
Yeah. All right. Now, soapbox, jumping off. But yes, that whole scene pissed me off to no end, but it reminds me of that where you've got the 4, and those are 4 adults. So you say children, okay, maybe you can fit 8 children per bed if it's a full size bed and not a twin size bed
together.
You sleep.
No,
what's that called? Like toes to head or whatever it's called. Anyway, again, this is also according to Donald. Maybe it was 4 kids per bed. Who knows? Some years later, his Aunt Doody. It's spelled Doodi. Do you not read that as duty? Yeah. She had 2 daughters, Peggy and Betty, and they actually went to retrieve him from this orphanage. And again, according to him, they treated him like Cinderella. Then he discovered that his Aunt Doody was technically his bio mom, Bessie Emily Whittington, that headmistress, and he started thinking the worst of society. And according to him, quote unquote, I was born with a chip on my shoulder as big as an elephant. Okay, if it was true that his mother gave him up to an orphanage where he was mistreated and then came back pretending to be his aunt with his biological sisters who decided to mistreat him and raise him as not a part of the family, I could understand if this is all true. I would be a bitter Betty too.
Oh, yeah.
Not Bitter Betty Creek, Jane Doe, but I always say Bitter Betty. I can't help it. And again, if you have not listened to our truckers episode, that's where that came from. In 1939, he joined the Royal Air Force Volunteer Reserve as a pilot, but while with them, he contracted cerebral spinal meningitis, which caused him to leave in 1940. But leaving the service didn't prevent him from still posing as a member of the RAF. He used this to pass forged checks at RAF stations and around the county, but he was caught in 1942 and quote unquote bound for 2 years. He married a woman named Cynthia, and the couple had a daughter in the summer of 1949. And that's all I'm going to go into his history because we don't know how much of the rest of it's actually true. He's not a great guy. I don't give a shit about how his childhood went because I've already said what may have created the monster that we know. While Donald was in custody, he was interrogated at the police station, but he continued to state that he had nothing to do with the murder of Stanley. He did have an association with him, but said he never would have done anything to him. But let's go back to his house, where they found blood under his floorboards, which is the same type as Stanley's. Investigating around the town, they discovered that he had his carpet cleaned the day after Stanley went missing. And he had his floorboards restained that same day. He also was the one who rented the plane at United Services Flying Club at Elstree, which he boarded with 2 parcels. And when he landed, he had no parcels. It was then that he caught a cab back to his home, the one that was paid for with one of the £5 notes. And when he was finally presented with all of this information, he said that the parcels contained a printing press and the forged gas coupons. But when pressed even further, he said, okay, the parcels were Stanley, but I didn't kill him.
Where are they? Did he throw them out while they were flying? Or did he just abandon them in the...
No, he threw them out while he was flying, and that's why he was found on the banks of the...
Betty.
That's the last episode. When he was found on the banks of the Essex coast in the Dengie mudflats. Yeah.
Oh,
so he chucked him out of the
that,
plane.
like you're up fishing or something, and all of a sudden, like...
Yeah, this duck hunter's like...
suitcase just explodes on the ground.
Oh my gosh, that would be epic. One with traumatic, not epic. Twisted. Let me regroup. I'm concerned.
You chose me to be your best friend.
Did I choose you? Okay. So it wasn't him. He said that 3 men approached him and gave him a £150 to drop, quote unquote, parcels into the sea. These men were named Mac, who was a man in his mid-30s, light hair, poor English accent, and he would polish his ring on his coat repeatedly. A man named Greenie, who was in his early 30s, and he wore a flashy green suit. And the boy, who had brown hair that was receding, wore steel-rimmed glasses and brown buckle shoes. He told police that he agreed out of desperation for money and the fact that they had been threatening him with a gun. The police believed that they had enough to charge Donald with Stanley's murder, even though everything was technically circumstantial evidence. His first trial resulted in a hung jury. Second trial, the judge basically said that because the jury couldn't come to a decision on guilt for murder, he was acquitted for that charge. Before a third trial would take place, Donald agreed to a deal. He would plead guilty for accessory after the fact and was sentenced to 12 years. Cynthia, okay, so keep in mind, he's been
done the Alford plea.
Yeah, but he's been acquitted of the murder. So then he pled to accessory after the fact. Keep those 2 things in mind. Double jeopardy. Cynthia left Donald in June of 1951, despite having defended her husband during his trials, And this was so that way she could marry a member of the press that was covering his trial, a man named Duncan Webb. And she met during the trials.
Yeah.
So she was like, "Oh, you're publishing about my husband's murder charge? Let's get it on."
Maybe they fell in love while he was interviewing her for it.
Probably, but I mean, love is love. And so she divorced him so that way she could marry Duncan. And Donald served 8 of those 12 years. He was released from Dartmoor prison to drop the bombshell of a statement that we opened the episode with. And that was on June of 1958. Donald knew that he couldn't be tried for the same crime twice, so he took this opportunity to spill all the truth to the Sunday Pictorial. His truth. Donald and Stanley worked together out of necessity, not because they liked each other, because Donald was the one who would steal cars that would match logbooks of wrecked cars, and they were bought on the cheap. It'd be a totaled car. He would go and buy the car. They would bring it. They would fix the car up, and then they were able to resell it at a very high price because they weren't manufacturing cars. So apparently, John Wick style, everything came to a head over Tony, who was Donald's dog. Tony was a half husky, half Alsatian. Do you know what that is?
I've never heard of that
I
bird.
should have given you. Look it up. We'll come back to you on that. And Tony, the dog, had accidentally brushed up against a vehicle that had recently been sprayed to conceal the fact that it had been stolen. So Stanley kicked Tony in anger for the damage, and Donald lost it. So what's an Alsatian?
It's basically a German Shepherd, also known as an Alsatian in the UK.
Oh, it's like how they call it an aubergine, but it's an eggplant.
What?
They have different words
They
for
probably
stuff.
don't want to call it a German Shepherd in UK because German is like controversial.
Oh,
So it's that.
okay.
It comes from the Alsace-Lorraine region, a border area between Germany and France. German Shepherd.
Well, Husky German Shepherd if you're from America or the United States of America, Husky Alsatian from all the areas that don't think that German Shepherd's okay to call a dog.
All right.
And yeah, you kick my dog, we're going to have issues. And I could tell you that right now. And so I can imagine that Donald was feeling the same way. And so their association was now tenuous. Stanley went to Donald's house that same day, and it was unknown that the final straw was seconds from being pulled. He did not say what started the argument that happened on October 4th, but he stated that it turned physical. Donald then grabbed an SS dagger, which is the Nazi dagger, and it was hanging on a wall as decoration. Ew. And he stabbed Stanley in self-defense, and then he stabbed him some more. And as he was stabbing him in the chest and the legs, Stanley stopped fighting, and Donald backed off just to watch him die. Self-defense. He then had to hide the body, so he stored him in a coal cupboard in the kitchen and then cleaned up the blood from the carpets and the flooring. That was when he moved Stanley's car back to the garage at Cambridge Terrace, not knowing that Stanley never would have left his car outside. The next day, he took the stained carpet or rug to the dry cleaners to have it dyed dark green after being cleaned. Then he noted additional stains on some of the furniture, so he figured that he'd get back to it. The priority at this point was Stanley's body. Cynthia had to go to an appointment at the hospital, and she took their baby with her, so he had the house free and clear to himself. He used a linoleum knife and a hacksaw to dismember Stanley's body. The legs went into one package wrapped in carpet felt. His head was placed in a box with a brick and rubble. His torso in another parcel. The money that Stanley had on him had become bloodstained. He just took out the notes that weren't bloodstained, and those are the ones that he was using. And the rest he burned. He deposited some in the bank because this is Donald. He was allowed to have a bank account. And then he decided to use the rest. He needed to get the body from the apartment now. So the first up was the legs and the head. He hired a car to Elstree Airfield, rented a plane, and then over the English Channel, he disposed of the dagger and the tools, then weighted down the body parts. And then he returned home where his wife, child, and Stanley's torso waited. The morning after the murder, he hired Joseph Thomas Staton to stain his floors. And while there, he asked Thomas for help carrying a package to his car. This package, by Joseph's estimate, was about 2.5 feet long, 1.5 feet wide, and 1 foot high. He said that it was very heavy and Donald instructed him to carry it by the ropes only. It was the torso. It was brought to the trunk of his car. They went back to Elstree Airport and they dropped the body from the aircraft again through a lot of manhandling and maneuvering of the plane. And he said that the three men he mentioned in his confession of dumping Stanley's body were loosely based on the policemen that had been capturing him. Now, Melissa May, what homework of a movie did I give you to watch before talking about this episode?
The Usual Suspects.
Are you seeing why I made you watch it?
No. Wait.
Kaiser Sose.
Which guy is that? Is that Kevin Spacey?
Yes, at the very end, where it was like he was just, while he was being questioned, he kept looking at the board and coming up with names from the board and then like the coffee
and the
mug
FBI guy put it all together.
Uh-huh.
My favorite part was when Kevin Spacey was walking because he was crippled.
Yeah, and then he just starts walking.
And I was like, he's going to start walking normal. And then they did. Like his foot was crooked in, and then eventually he started walking normal and fast and jumped in that car with that other bad guy.
Yep. Well, this is why I had you watch that movie, because it's the same thing as when Kevin Spacey was getting interviewed and he's just looking at the board, he's looking at memos, he's looking at the coffee cup and just like, yeah, it was this. It was this. This is the man who hired me.
And the coffee cup brand.
Mm-hmm. So Donald Hume did the same thing. Now you see why I made you watch it for homework?
Because I zoned out while he was getting interviewed. And I was like, oh, boring.
And that was the most pivotal moment.
Yeah. And then he's like, why would you pick a crippled guy? Because you're weak.
Mm-hmm.
And then the FBI guy put it together.
I can't believe that you zoned out on the most important part of the entire movie. And then again, if you have not watched Usual Suspects, yeah, I get that this is spoilers, but it came out a couple decades ago. So not my fault, but you should watch it.
Hence, Kevin Spacey is in it, so it's been a while.
Yeah. And Melissa May should have paid more attention.
It was boring.
I loved it. I want to watch it again.
I did my homework.
You did. I love it. And if you've noticed, Melissa May has been having more of a part of these. It's because I don't want to look everything up anymore. All Usual Suspects. He was just making up stuff about people that were in the room. And that was the three men that decided to, quote unquote, hire him, because that was a lie. So we're not done yet, because Donald didn't ride calmly off into the sunset. He's free from prison now. He's free of double jeopardy. He can't be charged, tried, or jailed again.
That's insane.
For the murder of Stanley Setti.
I don't like that rule.
It is what it is, but he gets his comeuppance because
karma, baby, karma.
It is. He changed his name to Donald Brown, and using 2,000 pounds that he made from his confession story to the paper, he took off to Zurich, Switzerland. While living there, he met a woman named Trudy Sommer, who was a hairdresser, and he wanted her to believe his lies about who he was. He went back to being an RAF officer with the name Johnny Bird. So again, another name. He presented her with a lifestyle that he could not afford. He was giving her expensive gifts, taking her out to fancy restaurants, and then he proposed to marry her. The problem, however, was his money was running out, and he needed a plan to make more. His new career, he decided to become a bank robber. Yeah. He flew back to London July 12th, 1958, and after telling Trudy that he was going to Canada to work as a pilot, that's how he was able to get free. In reality, he was waiting until August 1st or 2nd, depending on the article or book that you read. He was at the Midland Bank of West London, picked because he had banked there previously and because he believed that they would have a lot of money because all the wages for the local factory workers were paid from that area around that specific day. So he was stealing people's pay money. He waited until they had just about closed when there was only 4 workers left, and they let him in because they remembered him from like the decade earlier. When he was approached by Frank Lewis, a teller, with his automatic pistol, he shouted, "It's a stick-up." That's how I'm assuming it went. When Frank moved, Donald shot him in the stomach, and that caused Frank to fall behind the counter. He demanded the money, and the tellers told him they couldn't give him money any more than the 2,000 pounds because it wasn't fair. They had already paid out their workers. So he left the scene, the score, and thought that he was just going to have to make do with it. It is what it is. I did my best. Frank wound up surviving his wound, but Donald was pissed because he read the papers that reported that the tellers lied to him.
Oh,
The money was there. They just told him it wasn't. Donald returned to rob the bank again because they pulled one over on him and he was bitter. He shot another worker before fleeing back to Zurich. He realized he could not keep affording trips back and forth to London, so he decided to hit a bank closer to his home this time. What Donald hadn't counted on was the involvement of Scotland Yard, who was now on an international hunt for this man that they knew as Donald. But they had some errors on his real name and the alias in the wanted postings because he kept going not by his real name. So on January 1959, he went to the, I know I'm going to butcher this, Gerberby Bank. It's in Switzerland. That was with a cardboard box, which was used to hide his gun. The bank clerk, Walter Schunkel, was immediately shot by Donald, and before he fell to the floor, he was able to set off the alarm. Edwin Hugg was then approached by Donald and struggled with him, and he got struck in the head by the gun for his troubles. Donald then grabbed what money he could before jumping over the counter to flee. 16-year-old bank apprentice Ulrich Fritz took off after this man. Along the way, Donald shot and killed taxi driver Arthur Magg as Arthur had attempted to grab him as he was running past. He was finally approached by pastry chef Gustav Engstmann, who tackled him, lucking out when Donald attempted to shoot him, but the gun was out of ammunition. He was stopped, and the crowd that had been pursuing him, the men started punching him, the women were beating him with the umbrellas, and people were shouting, just kill him.
it's midnight stalker.
Right? It totally, Night Stalker. Yeah, it totally
style.
reminds me of that. And so police were able to, again, get in there in time to arrest Donald before the crowd could kill him. Now, to shorten this story just a little, they were able to determine his real identity. Gustav was given a reward for the capture, and Donald was charged with 5 counts of murder, attempted murder, robbery, threats, and contravene of the Aliens Act, basically stealing someone's identification. He was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to a life of hard labor. The Swiss were sick of his antics by the 1970s. They eventually convinced Britain to take him back. So they were like, we don't want him anymore. Take him. And so he was returned August 1976, where he was transferred to Broadmoor Mental Hospital, eventually then transferred to St. Bernard's Psychiatric Hospital. He had some good behavior and was released back to the public in 1992. But karma struck again because in 1998, a man was found on the grounds of the hotel in Basingstoke, Hants, and he was labeled as a John Doe for a week until the prince came back to 78-year-old Donald Hume, who had died from natural causes in obscurity.
Sucks that he lived that long.
It is, but wasn't it a roller coaster?
Yeah.
And even though I gave you so much information this time, you still had no clue where we were going.
No.
Great. All right. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that, and we'll talk to you next time.
Bye, y'all.
The views and thoughts expressed in this podcast are ours alone and do not represent the thoughts or opinions of anyone else. The information presented is for general information purposes only. We are not liable for anything you do with this information.